Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakahakodash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Mark chapter 3, verses 24 to 25. And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And it's pretty self-explanatory. If a kingdom is divided against itself, it can't stand and will fall. And we can clearly see that this current kingdom of the biblical Edomites, who are known as the so-called white people today, is divided. And just like when the kingdom of Israel was divided into the southern and northern kingdom and fell, it's going to be no different for this kingdom of the Edomites, which is known as the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, the last leg of the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 2. This is Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. Those legs of iron in that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream that the prophet Daniel interpreted for him. And this is the ancient pagan Edomite Roman Empire. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Verse 41. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, the last leg of the fourth beast, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, which began to come into existence when the Edomites started coming back into power during the Renaissance. Part of potter's clay and part of iron. And that part of potter's clay are the weaker nations in the last leg of the fourth beast, usually known as the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And part of iron, the stronger nations, the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden. The kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. But the main point I want to hearken on is where it says the kingdom shall be divided. And as we just read in Mark chapter 3, verse 24, when a kingdom is divided, it shall not stand. And in this video, I got a few bits of news information just to show the continuing division between the iron toes mixed with miry clay. And the first bit of info I'm going to go to is on Newsweek.com, titled, Boris Johnson's Ukraine trade envoy says Germany, not totally our friend. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's trade envoy to Ukraine, Baroness Meyer, has warned German leaders that they risk being on the wrong side of history by facilitating on support for Ukraine in the ongoing Russian invasion of the country. And as we're about to read in this article, you've got Boris Johnson's trade envoy to Ukraine, Baroness Meyer, getting on German leaders for not doing enough to go against Russia with dealing with Ukraine. And a lot of other nations in the last leg of this fourth beast feel the same way, such as the United States of America. Germany has a lot of lucrative business ties with Russia that they don't want to just easily give up because they would be hurt economically for doing so, such as the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which as of now has been put indefinitely on hold. And also Germany gets a lot of coal, oil, and natural gas exports from Russia. And for them just going cold turkey on everything, again, that would hurt them economically. So as you can see, there's a lot of conflicts of interest here, which is further leading to the divisions of this last leg of the fourth beast, the iron toes mixed with miry clay, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of. And it's going to ultimately lead to this entire thing falling down, and America's European allies in the last leg of the fourth beast turning against her and allying themselves with Russia to shoot 200 million nuclear missiles onto the United States of America. because at the end of the day, it's mainly the U.S. that's bullying these other European Edomite nations into going against Russia and going against any country in general that the U.S. is an enemy against. Mayer, a Conservative Party member of the UK's House of Lords upper chamber, told an event at London's Palace of Westminster on Monday that Germany's historic pivot to increased defense spending was dubious given Berlin's recent hesitation to support tougher European Union sanctions on Moscow and deliver heavy weapons to Kiev. And just recently, Germany has acquiesced a little bit in their hesitancy towards sending weapons to Ukraine. They've begun shipping some anti-aircraft tank systems to Ukraine, which they're going to allow the Ukrainians to use, but not have German soldiers in them, so they can show themselves as not as directly going against the Russians. German-born Mayer spoke at the launch of a report by the Council on Geostrategy detailing the security situation in the Black Sea. So this woman, Baroness Mayer, is a German herself. And this further goes into Mark chapter 3 in verse 25. A house being divided against itself cannot stand. Because just like you've got different tribes in the nation of Israel, you've got different tribes in the nation of Esau, Edom, and the Germans are the Temanites, which will call on NATO nations to increase engagements with regional allies in the face of Russian aggression and destabilization. Discussing Germany's hesitance in deeper support of Ukraine, Mayer told attendees, "I think, once again, Germany is probably a little bit on the wrong side of history here." German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced an historic increase in defense spending in response to Russia's latest invasion of Ukraine, which began on February 24th. Berlin has also been instrumental in the series of European Union sanctions packages seeking to choke Russia's economy, though has faced criticism for opposing bloc-wide bans on Russian energy imports. The kingdom shall be divided. In recent weeks, Scholz has also come under fire for his refusal to provide Ukraine with heavy weapons, including tanks, which, as I just said, Germany has started sending some anti-aircraft tank systems to Ukraine. Sending such arms, the chancellor has argued, would pose the unacceptable risk of direct NATO-Russia conflict. Germany, along with France and Italy, has also been criticized this week after reports suggested firms in both nations had exploited a loophole in an EU arms embargo placed on Russia after its 2014 annexation of Crimea to sell weapons to Moscow. So as you can see, while nations like the US and Britain are trying to keep up this image to show that the whole of the EU and NATO are against Russia and them going to war against Ukraine, behind the scenes, you've got a lot of these different European nations still doing business deals here and there with Russia. Scholz's resistance to sending more weapons to help Ukraine makes his pivot to expanding German defense spending very dubious, Mayer said on Monday. On the one hand, we've just heard that they're selling arms to Russia, and on the other hand, they are still buying quite a lot of oil, Mayer said. And remember this part right here, we're going to get into it a little bit later. Scholz came out and said we can't really reduce our dependency on Russia because it's going to be an economic disaster. Again, Germany and a lot of these European nations still rely heavily on natural gas, coal, and oil exports from Russia. It completely contradicts what he said quite recently, which was quite a big statement for Germany to say that they wanted to increase their defense budget. Germany has traditionally been a counterweight to more Russia-skeptic nations on Europe's eastern flank. The deep commercial ties between the two nations have long been a source of concern for some of Germany's European and NATO allies, not least the country's reliance on Russian energy exports. This dependence is standing in the way of further sanctions on Moscow, further leading to divisions in this last leg of the fourth beast. And like Big Worm said in that movie Friday, when you mess with my money, you mess with my emotions. Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine appeared to have prompted a historic reevaluation of Berlin's ties with Moscow. In February, Scholz, the leader of the Social Democratic Party, said the invasion began a new era. But deep ties with Russia and Germany's political and business elites have stymied what Berlin's allies hoped would be a rapid abandonment of a decades-long policy of rapprochement with Moscow, pursued by leaders from across the national political spectrum. Scholz has said Germany needs time to wean itself off Russian fossil fuels. An EU ban on coal imports will come into force in August, while Scholz has said he hopes to end natural gas purchases very soon. Russian oil imports, the chancellor has said, could be phased out by the end of this year, but immediate embargoes could prompt a severe recession at the cost of hundreds of thousands of jobs, Scholz has reportedly warned. So as you can see, Germany's in between a rock and a hard place. The EU is currently considering its sixth round of sanctions, which is expected to include measures on oil imports. Germany is not the only nation hesitating. Hungary, Italy, and the Netherlands, another part of that iron, are all among the EU nations that have urged caution on fossil fuel bans. Like I've been saying throughout the video, it's not just Germany that's hesitant and being more austere on Russia. A lot of nations are heavily tied to Russia economically, and by tearing themselves away from those lucrative economic ties, their economies would be hurt severely. What bothers me is how long the unity of the West can survive, Mayer said on Monday. Cracks are already showing. As Russia raises the tempo of war, the pressure on the West to do more will grow. That's pretty much it with this article, but that's a very powerful statement that Mayer just made. What bothers me is how long the unity of the West can survive. Again, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. We're living in the last seconds of the rulership of these Edomites before their entire kingdom goes down and the kingdom of heaven is set up. But now I'm gonna go to my second bit of information on Gravitas's, on Wyon's YouTube channel, and the video is titled, Gravitas, Is the West Trying to Hide Russian Oil Imports, just to further show the divisions among this last leg of the fourth beast, those iron toes mixed with miry clay. And I'm gonna start the video at the 1 minute and 29 second mark.
Russia is the world's largest oil exporter. On a usual day, the country exports 7.8 million barrels of oil. In 2021, crude oil and petroleum product exports made 37% of Russian export revenue. The West claims to be closing this tap. Countries have been told to not buy Russian oil. India has been lectured to not increase imports of Russian oil. But guess what? The West itself has not stopped buying oil from Russia. Russian oil is being secretly shipped to the West. This is the story of a murky operation. If you head to any Russian port today, you would find oil tankers marked destination unknown. In other words, no one knows where these oil tankers are going. Once they set sail, these tankers turn off their tracking systems, so there is no way to figure out their route or their destination. Reports say that Russian oil tankers have been disappearing from the tracking system.
Just another example of divisions among these iron toes mixed with miry clay. You've got nations like the US, Britain, and Canada pushing hard for a ban to Russian oil imports. But then you've got a lot of these other European Edomite nations doing secret backdoor doors to still get Russian oil imports.
One investigation found that during the week of March 12th, there were 33 such incidents of Russian tankers disappearing from the radar. Why? because these tankers were secretly delivering oil. Were these tankers headed to Europe? The continent is the biggest buyer of Russian oil. It imports 3.8 million barrels of Russian oil every day. Europe pays Russia $850 million every day for energy, $450 million for oil, $400 million for gas. These are pre-war numbers. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe came together to condemn the Kremlin. European leaders said they will reverse energy dependence on Russia. Listen in to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz.
Germany again.
We are actively working to get independent from the import of oil, and we think that we will be able to make it during this year.
Earlier this month, over 11 million barrels of oil were loaded into tankers tagged Destination Unknown. This murky trend corresponds with an increase of Russian oil exports to Europe. When the war broke out, Russian oil imports to Europe fell to 1.3 million barrels. It now stands at 1.6 million barrels a day. The increase is hardly surprising. You see, Europe needs Russian oil. Without it, European trucks and farm equipment will come to a standstill. 32% of the EU's energy comes from oil and 27% of the bloc's oil comes from Russia. Can Europe not import from West Asia or the United States instead? On paper, yes. In practice, not yet. Europe's oil infrastructure is designed for oil flow from east to west, not the other way around. And there is another problem. Certain European refineries are designed to use Russian oil. If you pour crude from Saudi Arabia or America into them, these refineries will become less efficient. In other words, Europe cannot afford to boycott Russian oil. It also cannot afford to openly buy Russian oil, because then it would be seen as funding the Russian war machinery. Even worse, betraying its NATO allies who have embargoed Russian oil. And this is where the Destination Unknown tag comes into play. These Russian tankers are ferrying oil to larger ships at sea. There, the Russian oil is mixed with other cargo. That way, Russian oil continues to flow into Western countries without the world taking notice. Reports say that Russian oil is being clandestinely loaded into ships heading to the Netherlands. In some markets, Russian oil has found new aliases. It is being called the Latvian blend or the Turkmenistani blend. Reports say barrels bound for Romania, Estonia, Greece and Bulgaria more than doubled in April. Shipments were also up for the Netherlands and Finland. Such is the West's desperation for Russian oil that it is being rebranded, secretly loaded with other cargo. Tankers are turning off transponders. They are breaking international law just so that the West can continue to fuel its development with Russian oil. And yet, somehow, the West thinks it has the locus standi to lecture India on its imports. Heights of hypocrisy, we say. WION now available in your country.
Back in Mark chapter 3, verse 24, and if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And as we've just clearly seen from that article and that YouTube video, this kingdom of the last leg of the fourth beast, the iron toes mixed with miry clay, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, is clearly divided, and we're living in the twilight hours of it before it completely goes down. And like I said earlier in the video, what this is ultimately going to culminate into is America's European allies turning against her and allying themselves with Russia and her allies, and they're all together going to shoot 200 million nuclear missiles onto the United States of America. But now I'm going to close it out in the book of Obadiah, and the header reads, Edom will be humbled. The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle, And this entire book is dedicated to you Edomites. But I'm going to jump to verse 7, which is dealing with you American Edomites in general, and how your allies, even your other European Edomite allies, are going to turn against you. All the men of thy confederacy, your allies, have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee, your European allies, showing lip service that they're on board with you and going against Russia over Ukraine, but behind the scenes still doing business deals with Russia, and prevailed against thee, eventually turning against you completely and allying themselves with Russia. They that eat thy bread receive a lot of money from the U.S. to keep up NATO and receive a lot of military defense from the U.S., have laid a wound under thee, allying themselves with Russia and shooting their nuclear missiles onto you. There is none understanding in him. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope your sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong, as we can clearly see we're almost out of this final captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.